Good morning. On behalf of the Department
Good
of
morning.
MA English, DG Vaishnav College, we welcome you all for the webinar on Literary Theory, Challenges and Implications. Now, before we start our session, we have a few instructions for the participants. All of you are kindly requested to keep your video and audio turned off throughout the session. If you have any questions, please post it in the chat box. It will be addressed towards the end of the session. At no point in time, please do not turn on your video or audio. Now, I invite our head, Dr. Murali Ganam, to introduce the speaker and deliver the welcome address. Over to you, sir.
So good morning and welcome to one and all. At the outset, I extend a warm and hearty welcome to all our participants who have most willingly spent their valuable time to be with us this morning to attend this program on theory, challenges and implications with our guest speaker, Dr. G. Naresh, Associate Professor, the Department of English, New College. Literary theory has always been a source of inspiration, a mystery, if not a challenge, being the most complex and a fascinating discipline by itself. This is because it is highly interdisciplinary and intellectually very demanding to comprehend. In fact, one can say that for the last 30 years or more, literary theory has become more theoretical than practical, such that if it is teaching or learning, it has become delightful and a fecundish exercise, but only if it is related to a given literary text. Studying literature as literature is of no use today. Studying literature as literature alone is inconsequential. To study pure literature, literature has to be related to theory. Only then does it create meaning and significance in a classroom. To go by the words of the eminent deconstructionist critic Paul D. Mann, the first reading of a literary work is always only an elementary reading, serving an utilitarian purpose that affords a paraphrasable summary, whereas it is the second reading that becomes a meta-reading of the text, stirring us intellectually and making us vibrant to explore new dimensions in the text. So it is here that I would like to welcome and introduce our chief speaker this morning, Dr. G. Naresh, Associate Professor, the Department of English, New College, who will elaborate on the challenges and implications in the understanding and the practice of theory. Dr. Naresh completed his studies, his undergraduation and post-graduation at Loyola College, Chennai. He was a junior research fellow at the IIT Madras and later went on to obtain his PhD degree as well from IIT Madras, with the area of specialization being the American novel, the search for the self in the novels of Walker Percy. He started his career as editor, legal transcription for Nitani Decision Services Chennai before entering the teaching profession, where he has a very valuable experience of 25 years and more, having taught at the Hindustan Engineering College and R&K Engineering College as well. He is currently the Associate Professor of English, the New College, Chennai. Apart from several publications in various journals, he is also a research supervisor for the MPhil and PhD programs with the University of Madras, Bharatidasan University, and MS University, having supervised more than 25 research scholars. This apart, that is, his teaching apart, his expertise would also extend to other fields such as freelance copy editing, more than 20 years for the NIIT, Newgen, SPS, Exeter, Free Media Services, Life Science Journals for Pearson, and the British Medical Journals. His key areas of interest include literature, theology, religion and philosophy, and literary theory. So, with these few words of introduction, I would request Dr. E. Naresh to take over proceedings and elaborate on the challenges and complications in the understanding and practice of literary theory. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Murali Ganam, sir, for your very kind words and introduction. It is always a pleasure to talk with you and interact with you. So it is indeed my privilege to be associated with this webinar on literary theory. We have titled it as Challenges and Implications, organized by the Department of English, PG, DG Vaishnav College. So my sincere thanks to the management of the college, the principal, and specifically Dr. Murali Ganam, the head of the department, who has been very gracious to invite me to this program. I'm also thankful to the members of staff who have extended their help to conduct this program. And certainly I am delighted to greet the participants as well. They are taking their time to attend this program. So I hope we'll have a very fruitful discussion. So the response to the theme, that is literary theory, it is, I think, an indication of the relevance and importance of this area of literary studies. As Dr. Murali Ganam has very aptly pointed out, he called it intellectually demanding. So it's a very, I think it captures the essence of what is involved in what we call as doing theory. So when we use theory, we need to be intellectually prepared to confront many obstacles or complications. And I hope that this presentation or this discussion will to some extent lessen or alleviate those complications. So what I shall attempt to do is to present an overview of the various schools of theory. That itself is actually, we have a time constraint obviously. So I'll try my best to give the salient features of each of these schools. And then we will conclude with some of the implications of the positions adopted by the various theoreticians and proponents. So I feel that that could be an area of interest because other information is available and a lot of material is available. But this, I suppose, is more useful. And time permitting, I would like to have a kind of a question and answer session. It's very ambitious, I know, because theory is an ocean and it is not possible to be kind of, I think it is very audacious to claim that you know every facet or dimension, but I'll try to respond to any queries that may be present at the end. So we will go about it in this manner. I'll try to share my screen with you. Okay, I hope it is visible. Okay. I think there is some issue. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Yeah, but I am unable to flip the pages. Just give me a minute. Sorry. Yeah, I hope now it is clear.
Yes, sir, we can see the screen.
Fine. Okay, wonderful. So this is, so to speak, the title: Literary Theory, Challenges and Implications. As you can see, some of the theories are mentioned here. It's probably the most recent one, cultural studies. Then you have others like new criticism, then reader response, post-colonial, and so on. This is not a complete graphical representation. Some of the theories that are there. So before we begin, kind of a small guidance for us. There could be objection to the relevance of theory, especially considering that it is quite complex. So there's a kind of a citation from one of maybe the more accessible texts on theory called Critical Theory Today by Louis Tyson, where she says that theory can help us to see ourselves and our world in valuable new ways. I think that emphasis I would like to have in this presentation today. One is about meaning, and simultaneously I want to correlate meaning to our understanding of the world. I think in some ways both are synonymous. Okay, so theory can help us to learn to see ourselves, and she goes on to indicate the various areas. As you can see, it is practically everything from education to entertainment to watching films, as consumers, voters, citizens, our interrelationship with people, our religious and political kind of ideologies we have. So there is nothing that theory does not affect. So I would like to emphasize that the so-called literary theory that we have, which itself is a takeoff from something called merely theory or sometimes critical theory. So our literary theory basis is actually on something beyond literature itself, which is called simply theory or critical theory. So this critical theory has implications not just to literature. So we would be very mean or very selfish to limit theory to a study of literature. That is not the case. So no, we need to see that it affects, simply put, life itself. So the world, life, meaning, all these are key terms. Okay. So what I would do here is, of course, introduction to the topic, kind of distinguish very briefly theory and criticism. What is criticism, literary criticism? What is theory, literary theory? And how do they relate to each other? Then a kind of a working definition, which we will use for the entire talk today. Then immediately followed by challenges. I think we need to understand what theory implies. When we get ready to use theory, what does it mean? So what are the challenges involved in applying theory? So a kind of an overview of the challenges, a couple of points here, or categories. One is a general overview of the challenges, and one taken from David Carter. So that is very briefly the challenges that are enumerated by David Carter. I would just share it with you. Then this is the central aspect, the different schools of theory. Some timeline is given. So very difficult to actually fix the dates of the beginning of these theories, but whatever is commonly acceptable, I'll share that with you. And the overview of some of the schools, not completely, it's only select, because different theoreticians or different no, uh, texts will have slightly different emphasis. So I would not be claiming that every school of theory I have no, put it down, but whatever is largely useful to us, I have kind of no, charted the very essential characteristics or features. In a real sense, this is a simplistic presentation, but we have to begin somewhere, and so we kind of start off with this. So every school will have some no, a very profound kind of an approach. We will need more time to study each of these theories. So yeah, to have a very general discussion on literary theory itself is highly ambitious. So we need to keep all this in mind. Okay, then a kind of a list of the practitioners. So each of these theories, who are the major no, practitioners, who are the major or the key players of each of these theories, kind of a couple of charts we have, and a kind of a reiteration of what we have been doing about nature of theory as well as practice. And this is where I would like to have some time. Probably I'll try to go faster in the earlier parts. So the implications I feel are very, no, very deep, and they affect all of us. So we'll look at the implications towards the end. So challenges and implications with a kind of an overview of the schools of theory and some working definitions. Okay. So we'll start off with theory versus criticism. Sometimes we know, have this phrase literary criticism and theory, or sometimes the other way around, literary theory and criticism. What does that mean? Actually, criticism or literary criticism is interpretation of a text. So when we interpret a literary text, so you're reading a novel, let's say, no, Jude the Obscure or Mayor of Casterbridge, you want to grasp the meaning. So that is called criticism. So literary criticism. So then we are doing literary criticism. But when you are interpreting the text, you may have a certain approach, a certain method or criteria. Let's say you're looking at Animal Farm or 1984, you may probably apply some Marxist thinking or socialism, etc. So then you're having a method that you apply to the actual text. That method, largely today we have the theory part, that is the literary theory part, giving us, or the critical theory part, giving us the method. So simply put, criticism is actually applied theory. So literary criticism is nothing but applied literary theory or critical theory. When you apply theory to interpret a text, it becomes criticism. So sometimes or very often these terms are used synonymously. So it doesn't really matter, but as long as you understand the distinction, it is fine. So criticism is actually what we do. This is our business. We kind of look at interpretation of text, but we are sometimes conscious, sometimes not so conscious about the assumptions that we are using to interpret that text. That assumption or that principles that we have is should be taken from actually literary theory. You know, sometimes we apply it on our own intuitively, but the proper way is to have some knowledge of the different schools and apply it, and therefore critical theory becomes the foundation or the basis for application or the manner of interpretation of a literary text. So as we have seen, literary theory nothing but the entire body, you know, the set of ideas or methods. So socialism or Marxism is an idea, psychoanalysis is another idea. So the several ideas are present, and these are also known as methods. So when you're reading a text or you're interpreting a text or a literary work, you use these ideas and methods, and therefore these various theories, they are, you know, helpful in explaining or interpreting a literary work. So how do I do it? I do it. No, it's like no, you cannot have a no understanding of a text without some basis. No, so we need to understand the ideological position or the sociological background or the historical, you know, context. So many dimensions are there. If it's psychological, it deals with the conscious or the unconscious or the psyche of the characters and so on and so forth. These theories comprise of what is known as literary theory. And very important obviously by now we all know that theory I mentioned is a takeoff from critical theory, but this critical theory or theory as such is from probably every field known to, yeah, I wouldn't like to say only social and human sciences. Sometimes it's even sciences also, but largely no. So application of diverse knowledge and perspective. So it is a takeoff from, let's say, psychology, from Marxism, from history, from philosophy, obviously, from theology sometimes. So no, from gender studies, no, that is the first wave, second wave, third wave of feminism. From there into queer studies, etc., which are actually socio-political or cultural movements from which we borrow and we apply them as feminism and gender studies. So all these branches. So, for example, a person who wants to do a psychoanalytical interpretation or a breakdown of a text, you need to know a bit about Freud and Lacan, at least, or maybe even Jung. So, and we know, see, Freud is a very proliferant writer. So he's has enormous amounts of works credited to him. I think his complete volumes go to 50 or odd volumes, his collected works. So it is not possible for being, in literature too. So we have to have this in mind. So even the greatest theoreticians, they are working with some amounts of the knowledge that is available outside literature. So that itself is quite challenging. For example, we may be very uneasy, let's say, with Marxism, for example. Then obviously it is going to be more challenging for us to apply Marxist approach. So these are some aspects of literary theory, and as we have seen, the application of theory is criticism. But why do we need criticism? So though my topic is not on literary criticism, I'm just taking it for granted. Obviously, when we talk about theory, we are going to use it to apply to interpret text. So therefore, we are also talking about criticism. But ultimately, the aim of criticism, very crucially, is to evaluate the text, to evaluate the literary work. How do we judge? Very often we have that taken on a kind of a faith basis, so to speak. So the syllabi would have some text. Maybe we have a breakdown from British poetry or to British prose and so on, or maybe American literature. So the way in which programs divide study of literature, and certain texts are prescribed. Okay, I may read Hawthorne and Hemingway in American novel or American fiction. I'm taking it for granted that they're good writers. Why? Because it is prescribed. But how have I understood, or have I understood, or have I really been able to justify the reason for it being prescribed? Very often we may not be able to. Putting it another way, let us say you are given a text that is written by a very famous person, but let's say it's a minor work of his, and a very good text by a minor writer. Both two spectrums, end of the spectrum. I think it is very difficult to to evaluate. So how do we evaluate? Unless we are told, someone is very great. Invariably, our discussion starts off is one of the greatest Victorian poets, one of the greatest modern poets, or something like that. Already, I'm telling you, he's great. Then you tend to kind of go in that. But how does someone actually evaluate it? Earlier days, the so-called canon, formation of canon, probably till at least say mid 20th century, till the war, Second World War. Probably it was done on the basis of giant critics. It could be F.R. Lewis or Samuel Johnson or any such critic, or T.S. Eliot. They kind of evaluate and say a text, and it so happens that we fall in line. But after war, a post-war, so to speak, when theory started becoming very prominent, for the first time we have actually a proper method of judging and evaluating. I'm not saying that it's easy. Definitely it's not easy at all. But we have. So this is criticism. So how to evaluate? Evaluation means whether you're able to say a work is good or not. Let's say Shakespeare, and compare him to a very minor poet or a dramatist. We end up by saying Shakespeare is a better dramatist. So how do we do that? We must have a basis, not by feeling. I like or I enjoy Shakespearean plays. I don't enjoy so much, say, Ben Jonson. So therefore, Shakespeare is a. That's not the way to do things. So hopefully, theory or literary theory will give us a way of evaluating the quality or the merit of a literary work. It doesn't work like that as simply as I'm putting it, but no, we need to keep this in mind. So doing theory, so very nice. I think kind of emphasis, no, like why do we need theory, so to speak? What is the requirement of theory? No, from very important text, Johns Hopkins Guide to Literary Theory and Criticism, the preface to it. So where the editors are saying that actually theory refers to the basic definitions of the various approaches, like I said, feminism or Marxism or new historicism or eco-criticism, whatever it may be. So they, first of all, we need to know the basic definitions, because from there we can proceed to deeper knowledge and understanding. So this is actually a search for a foundation for evaluating critical practice. I think very key no phrase. This is a search. We are searching for it. It's no. That many have claimed that they have arrived. Many have claimed that okay, this approach is enough to completely interpret any text. Let's say at least from Chaucer till the current date. No, that's only a claim. But as this word implies, it is still ongoing. It is a search for sufficient foundations, the required foundations. We need this, at least necessary, required, and something that fulfills the purpose. It is enough, something that is sufficient foundation for evaluating critical practice. So without a foundation, critical practice will merely be something personal. No, for example, I'll give you a very well-known historical example. We are aware, for example, that Dr. Johnson, Samuel Johnson, is one of the most prominent critics in British literature or English literature. So he had a kind of no, very poor opinion of metaphysical poets. So no, unequal ideas by yoked together with violence. Very famous phrase of his, dismissive of metaphysical poets. But then you come down a couple of centuries down to T.S. Eliot, who speaks so highly about the metaphysical poets. He was himself much influenced by the technique or the wit of metaphysical poetry, and he talked about dissociation of sensibility, and he mentioned that the metaphysical poets, there was an association of sensibility which was later lost in English poetry. So now we have two giants, two great critics, Dr. Johnson, who was not much no, fond of metaphysical poetry. He had quite a poor opinion, actually speaking, and Eliot, along with other new critics, who elevated metaphysical poetry to a very high pedestal, almost putting it as among the best examples of poetry that you can find in Britain. So that, no, what is the basis for Dr. Johnson making that evaluation, and what is the basis? So essentially, I think we have to look at interpreting text and looking at the possible interpretations. Sometimes as many individuals are there, so many interpretations are there. So theory is nothing but an objective way of coming or arriving at an interpretation that can be supported by some evidence or from some data. Okay, so we need this foundation for evaluating critical practice. And of course, it is also a process. The theory is a process of making explicit something that is hidden. That is, sometimes even the author or even the reader, they're both unaware of these dimensions, that is social, historical, and ideological. For example, we are reading about a patriot, and you have, let's say, a play about that person. So it is very possible that the group with which that person, that historical figure is associated with, will tend to have a more positive view of that person. Probably someone whom this individual resisted. So we may not be able to be much impressed, or we will probably look at the negative aspects of that person, and therefore the text itself becomes. So sometimes the social, historical, ideological, political, etc., religious, these interests, all these interests are implicit in the author. The author himself may not be. Let's say George Orwell writing 1984 or Animal Farm, it is possible that he was highly critical of, no, though he was a Marxist and all that, but he was objective enough to know the dangers. So sometimes you can have a text which is no, very powerful, but that could be a kind of a propaganda that is done by the author. So all these we need to find out. So I'm just taking some time off because this is the basis. So a kind of a definition which we will use in this session. So what is theory actually? Nothing but a body of ideas and methods, a kind of, a quantum of knowledge, so to speak, about approaches, about ideas, about methods, all are more or less the same meaning they have. We use this to interpret literature. So we need some method, we need an approach, we need some idea, set of ideas. Marxism is an idea, feminism is an idea. So when we are able to look at the corresponding literary equivalence, then if you have this theoretical base, you will be able to appreciate the text better. That is actually the simplest way of looking at theory. Otherwise, it is a description of the underlying principles. The underlying principles. What is the basis of these? So we talked about a method. Sometimes people say it's a lens or an approach. All are similar words or similar practices. Sometimes we use the word practice, but there must be some principles underlying these practices. If the description of this is nothing but theory or tools, another word to use. It's a tool by which we want to interpret or get hold of the meaning of literary works. So very simply put, we cannot take a text and interpret it, either even to say it is good or bad, or even to suggest that this is the meaning of the text, without a basis for this attestation. So I'm claiming that I have understood a particular text. So Mayor of Casterbridge, I read it and I tell it's a remarkable novel, and I am trying to give you the meaning of that novel. Now theory tells us, or at least it has made us to stop, to hesitate, to be very quick in praising or judging or even claiming that we understand the meaning of a text, because now we have certain rules, so to speak, certain conventions. It doesn't mean that everybody follows it, but I think we cannot neglect it. So theory has become so important, we cannot neglect it. So we need to have a way in which we are interpreting the literary text, and that very broadly is what theory does. It gives us the, and unfortunately probably, or fortunately, whichever way you want to see it, fortunately because it has so much to it, unfortunate because it makes it quite unwieldy. Theory is not actually one set of principles. We have different, let's say, schools of literary theory, different schools of literary theory. It's not just one. So it becomes therefore quite challenging. Each school is actually takes quite some time, may involve people who are writing across time frames. Probably somebody 18th century, a philosopher, it takes off from that. Let's say something like reader response has taken off from at least two other theories not connected with literature, actually speaking. One is called phenomenology, which is a philosophical method. The other is hermeneutics, which is a theological process. And then from there you arrive at something called reception theory or reader response. So sometimes to understand even a reader response application of theory will require a lot of reading. So usually we may not be, unless you are very keen on it, or secondly, maybe you are going to do research. Supposing you are looking at research, then definitely it's very valuable, it's very useful to have this as a basis. So when you're looking at research, it is very useful to have it as a basis. Okay, so I have lost my screen, so give me a moment. Okay. So there is some problem I'm facing. I don't know why. Probably it's a PowerPoint. It's PDF. It comes. Is it visible, the screen? Kindly, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir, it's
Ah,
visible.
wonderful. Okay, thank you. Sorry, because I'm facing some issues. I have not encountered this earlier. Okay, so we look at the challenges. No, so I'm talking about theory, how it is required to have a framework for interpreting. See, our objective is very clear. We want to understand text. We want to get the meaning of a text. We want to be able to judge whether the text is good or bad. It's great literature or poor literature. No, we will also look at these terms little later, but I'm just using the common way of looking at literature. So we need to have a method of, instead of having a very let's say personal reaction to literature, we must have a kind of, if you want to use the term, scientific reaction, meaning science is something which is praised because the same no set of no acts that you do under the same condition, you should get the same result. It doesn't matter who is doing it. No, that is what, like in a lab we do experiments, and your, let's say gravity, you're supposed to get 9.8. If you do the experiment correctly under the same condition, following the same processes, obviously you should get the same result, meaning that there is validity to the result. If I have not done the experiment properly, then someone can point out and say, no, no, you have not done it correctly. So can we have something similar in literature? So that is the basis for the reason for actually the need for theory. Okay, so we have this objective and subjective. Science is supposed to be objective, meaning that these results or the judgment, so to speak, that is done in a scientific background or a scientific context, can be checked as true or false. No, normally, let's say blood pressure. No, someone comes and takes my blood pressure. If the process is correct, they are able to know kind of do it properly, you should get the exact result or the correct result. If someone doesn't do the test properly, maybe a technician comes and does, maybe a very young person is just joined and he has not done it properly, then obviously you'll say no, it's wrong. Then you have a way in which to tell that person, no, 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 this is how it is. But literature or no so-called arts, it is, they are subjective. It comes from the word subject. That means person, individual. So we don't have a basis. So theory tries to give us an objective method of kind of interpreting literature. But the challenge is there is no one size fits all, meaning that one theory which fits all possible literary texts. No, we don't have. Because some texts are philosophical, some are historical, some are moralistic, some are political, some are cultural. No, some deal with race, some deal with caste, some deal with gender. So how do we? We do not have, for example, no. Let's say an eco-critical no, approach, whether it will be applicable to no, maybe someone like George Orwell. Probably not, unless you extend it and go out of the way, beyond the context you want to fit in. No, it doesn't. So we need different schools of theory to be able to cater to the so many varieties of literature that are available. Then one other very important aspect or dimension, there is actually speaking no one-to-one corresponding no parallel between theory and text. For example, feminism. Let's take the French feminists, Ciseaux or no, okay, Irigare or whoever it may be. So when they are talking about, no, or even a very famous or simple example like gynocriticism of Showalter, do we really have a text that reflects gynocriticism? Normally, no. Even in a very common, within quotes, common area such as feminism, let alone other complicated areas. Because simply put, theory, I told you, no, this theory is derived from what is known as critical theory. It is a field, very normally it is, a lot of this comes from philosophy. So especially post-structuralism, no, we talk about Derrida, for example. He is a philosopher. So why I don't understand Derrida, I read Derrida, I get very depressed. No, 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 I don't know. Obviously, we are not trained. Normally, we are not trained in the philosophical method. There's a way to read a philosophical text. We are not trained with that. So I can't just pick up Derrida like a newspaper and start reading it. So that is the problem. And when we have these thinkers from the other disciplines such as philosophy or psychology or Marxism or any other area of social sciences or human sciences, they are talking not keeping literature in mind. Derrida does not talk about even deconstruction, though he uses some literary examples here and there. His intention is something else. His intention is the problem of presence and absence, the metaphysical concept of presence and absence. So his intention or his hypothesis or his objectives are so different. But since I do not have an objective way of interpreting text or evaluating text, what do I do? Okay, I do not have anything from literature per se. Actually, till post-war, theory, so to speak, was the realm of those practitioners from literature. For example, F.R. Lewis or Matthew Arnold, another good example. T.S. Eliot I mentioned. All these are writers who are also poets or who are probably novelists or they are theoreticians. But after a cut-off date, very rough cut-off date after 1945, after the Second World War, when especially 1960s when post-structuralism came, structuralism started early 20th century with Saussure, 1900. Okay, but still, by the time it came to literature, it took some time. Probably the two wars intervened, whatever reason. So we are using all those areas outside literature. It's not pure literature. It is not the exclusive property, so to speak. It is not something that is, in a sense, the kingdom. So if you want to use that term, it is outside. It is another kingdom. I'm going to another kingdom, maybe social sciences, anthropology, linguistics. Even linguistics, properly speaking, is not literature. Okay, then we are applying those from other fields for different purposes. No, Levi-Strauss applies structuralism to study anthropology. I am going to Levi-Strauss and I am taking the structuralist method and I am trying to look at some literary text. So it is not written with the intention to explain a text. So that is the biggest reason why sometimes theory is so difficult to apply. So I am saying one side that we need theory to apply to literature. Yes, true. But we also should be aware that there are some aspects of this theory which actually, at least let me say, there's no ready application of theory to text. It's not just available, I pick it up and then apply. Let's say, Arnold's theory or any of these people, touchstone method of Arnold, so to speak. So what did he say? You have some classics. You take the classics. Some new contemporary writer comes. You apply the principles of these classics or you try to find out why these classics are good. And you see whether this current poet, contemporary poet or novelist or whoever, whether he is on par or she is on par. And if so, yes, he is also a good writer. So it's a touchstone method. But that method, you're judging a text which is new based on already something that has been judged as good. It is from literature. But the other theories, including good example is actually feminism, a socio-political movement or even a cultural movement. It started off first wave, second wave, third wave of feminism. It actually began in the, it became very famous in the public realm because of what is called as the suffragette movement. So voting rights. So women, I think 1918 or something in US, women got right to vote. So 1776 US got its independence from UK, but only the beginning of 20th century. And I think immediately in England, also they gave. So it started off as voting rights. Women fought for right to vote, to exercise their franchise. It's not something to do with literature. So from there on, other movements came. Right to education, right to so on and so forth. They are all political movements. No, they are not necessarily literary. Movements or literary kind of elements or dimensions. Okay, so this is an important. Then, of course, we have seen this scope of theory is enormous. So to access even the various aspects of one school is also quite challenging. Added to the complication is it is not linear, meaning it is not going from one point to another point, especially of time. So 1910, this is the theory, 1920, 19, something like a scientific theory developing. Let's say a theory of evolution or something. Started off with Darwin, probably 1858, something, origin of species, so on. 150 years, something else is there. It's not like that. One more, another big aspect. One is that theory has the basis in another discipline, not literature. One, so you don't have a one-to-one correspondence. Another biggest challenge, probably, these two I will rate as very important challenges. The technical terminology, what we say jargon, the language that is used in theory. I think by and large, even writers who try to explain these theories, whether Patricia Waugh, Louis Tyson, whoever it may be, so many writers are there. Invariably, everybody will start very often by trying to say that this theory is very complex, this person is very complex, this idea is very complex, is something almost undefinable, etc., etc. It goes on. So why this should be so, why it is so inaccessible, why should it be so difficult? This is not the forum to kind of debate, but this is the result. It's quite challenging, quite complex, quite obscure, sometimes almost it doesn't seem to have any meaning, including that of Derrida, probably largely, whether it's Derrida or Foucault or any of these people, Lacan, another good example, or the French feminists, most of these are quite obscure. Gayatri Spivak, Homi Bhabha, example from our own background, all are complex. Homi Bhabha's othering, you need to take some time to understand what he means. And if I don't understand what the concept of othering means, then how do I apply it to study literature, a text? So that is a problem. So essentially, what we need to know is at this state, like we are not, for example, undergraduate students, some of you know, obviously some of you I hope are teachers yourself, otherwise scholars or PG students. We need to know there is a problem of definition. What is literature? So people like Kelly Eagleton, many have discussed this. You can check it out. So what is literature? So what do you mean by literature? How do we say a text, it is not literature, literary, non-literary? So how do we distinguish from literature? Again, this is an ongoing debate. We can't arrive at solutions in this small session. It's not possible. I'm just putting it across. So what is literature? How do we? In putting it very briefly, actually speaking, there is no way to distinguish something literary from non-literary. That's where theory comes. We hope that it helps us to tell something is literary and non-literary. So second, more important, how do you arrive at the meaning? Because it's very clear that different texts mean different things to different people. Very clear. So I think there's no need for me to say. Like, I'll give you a simple example. Let's say 50 or 60 of us are here. Let's take a text which we are not familiar with, and we take some time to interpret it or critique it, etc. I am very sure that there will be several different interpretations. Possible all 50 will be quite different. Why has that happened? If there is only one way of interpreting, or if there's a fixed way of interpreting, maybe some of us will do it correctly, some who are not properly, okay. But why does it have so many different interpretations? So that is a problem. So then how do we know the text actually means this? Are we certain about the meaning of the text, whether it conveys something or we don't even know it has any meaning at all? I think a lot of contemporary literature which doesn't bother about actually conveying a meaning, this happens. They don't worry about the meaning of the text. They are worried about the process of the writing process. Okay. So text meaning, how do we arrive at it? So what is literature? What is not literature? Then how do we arrive at meaning? Then this similar second point actually leads to the third. Who has the authority? Dr. Johnson, a famous critic, not an anthology. Who? Is it Harold Bloom, or who? Who is the person who is going to tell? Is it the teacher, or who is it? So we need to, Raghuram Tilak, I think, a very famous earlier days. I don't know if he's followed today. So all these people, who has the right to claim validity? Okay, Then, of course, the larger aspect, whether literature is isolated activity, it's done like we say, ivory tower. The writer is in an ivory tower, and even the reader is not related to the world. Something is happening in the world. No literature. We are so that relation to the world. So these are some challenges that have to be kept in mind when we are doing a study of literature. So this is what theory actually hopefully helps us to resolve. These are very basic complications in literature. So it has, then why should I bother? Why should I? Obviously, if we cannot even distinguish a text as literary or non-literary, then what is it that we are doing in the branch of literature? So we are having programs, UG program, research program. We have faculty of literary studies, so to speak. We are not even sure about the foundations of our discipline. Then how do? So it's actually a very crucial, let's say a challenge. We don't use the term problem. It's a challenge. I hope so far you have been able to follow the track of what I've been trying to get it across to you. So we have two kind of entities. One is theory, other is text. So one is the body of the set of principles which you need to apply to the text, and when you are applying this body of approaches or the methods to the literary text, then that becomes criticism. And there are some aspects that come out of such an application of theory to text, which is what we have seen so far. Now,
Excuse me,
of
sir.
course, yeah, yeah,
Sir,
yes,
sorry to interrupt.
yes,
So the
tell
screen
me.
is stuck in slide number 5, sir. I think you have moved on to slide 9, but we are able to see only slide number 5.
Okay, why? 1 minute. I'll re share it. Just a minute. Is it okay now?
Yes, sir.
Fine. So this is what I have
Thank you.
been, yes, I've been discussing these. No, if anybody is very keen or interested, I can pass on this. It's not a problem. Okay, let them not be worried. I can send it across to one of you, and you can in turn uh, give it to them. These are not something that is this very common knowledge. When you're doing theory, all these things come, so it's not difficult actually. Okay, so taking from very proper source, a text called Literary Theory by David Carter, these same challenges are in slightly different terms. One is about the author, of course. The author is a challenge in literature, meaning study of literature, or interpretation of literature, or interpretation of literary text. Literature, literary work, literary text, etc. All are the same meaning actually. So the authorial presence is important. Then the relationship of the text and the world, and the mode of textual. What is the mode that you are applying, or the approach that you are applying. Obviously, these go under interpretation and perspectives. What are the different perspectives that you have in interpreting a text, etc. Then, of course, this older term, aesthetic judgment. Today, I think we don't talk so much about aesthetics, but originally, the judgment or valuation of literature as a work of art. Of course, aesthetics is appreciation of beauty and all that. So, literature, which is supposed to entertain, two principles, older days, mimetic theory and aesthetic theory, which is mimetic means it reflects reality, it mirrors reality. That is one, that is mimesis or imitation. Then the second is supposed to entertain or give us pleasure and so on and so forth. Okay, then how to negotiate with meaning. So these are some of the challenges taken from David Carter. You can refer to it. And the problems of evaluation. Simply put, all this can come under one category, the problem of evaluating. How do you evaluate a text? So almost like, let's say somebody gives me a gold ring or something. Okay, I'm very happy, but I want to really know whether it's gold or what kind of gold, 16 karat, 18 karat, whatnot, or KDM, I think, or 916. So many terms are there. No, how do I do it? There is something called a caratometer. I go to some jewel shop or something like that. They are using other methods, like probably they will take a kind of use a the same touchstone method. No, they have a kind of a stone which they scratch the ring, and then they will be okay. Properly speaking, there's a caratometer, and that will tell you what no carat it is, and therefore the value of that ring. So 6,000 rupees, 600 rupees, 8,000 rupees, and so on and so forth. So what is a way in which we evaluate something subjective, something, in fact, writing is also personal. The author is a person, and he is giving or she is giving a personal creative output to us, which is the text, a novel, a poem. It comes from something. No, we are not even sure about the creative process, how it takes place. So the problem of evaluation. So very broadly put, these three: the classical period, earlier period, we first of all used to decide something is literature or not literature, and they would simply kind of not look at the non-literary forms. They would only look at the literary texts, literary works, and little later this kind of became even more consolidated. We talked about high literature and low literature in modernism. People like Eliot talked about this. So good or bad literature, high or low. And today in cultural studies, we have actually there's no distinction, but I put it for our own understanding. So we talk about literature versus popular forms, like for example, films or music. So cultural studies does not have much of a kind of privileging for literature. It doesn't foreground literature. It tries to look at other cultural forms like films or music or other, let's say even internet, so on and so forth, not literature. Okay, so reading, interpretation is no longer accepted as arriving at truth. So writer is a kind of a genius, who has put Shakespeare. Okay, some universal wisdom is there in Shakespearean plays. If I work hard enough, I understand the truth of reality or truth of the world and so on. So truth in a very broad sense. No, today we do not say reading will lead us. Even if you apply theory, this what you call formula doesn't work. And therefore, of course, truth as present in literature and humanities, that is challenged. So then what is the validity of literary studies? A broader question. Okay, so this is, so far we have tried to look at the distinction between criticism and theory, try to look at theory per se as a kind of a definition, which simply means a set of principles or set of rules or assumptions. That's a technical word that we use to interpret a text. We have been seeing that. We also looked at some challenges, and now we come to the real, probably the core of the presentation, the different schools that are, these are only some, like I said, different authors or different critics, different writers will have slightly different approaches to. I've tried to enumerate them for our own purposes. This is not exhaustive or complete, but I hope it contains practically every important school. So we have a progression actually from what is called as humanism or liberal humanism to cultural studies. I think many of you or all of you will be familiar with a very, very popular text, Beginning Theory by Peter Barry. So he will start off with liberal humanism. Very many writers will not talk about humanism, they will not bother. Probably they start with something like structuralism or formalism. But he talks about it, I think very important, because this is the earlier approach where literature was universal, where literature was, let's say, wisdom. Literature gave us insight into the meaning of the world, meaning of existence, what it means to be human, humanism or humanities. That's why you have the term humanities. All that was there. But today we have something, probably this is where we are right now, cultural studies, because there are some who talk about post-theory, new pragmatism, so many other things have come. Okay, for sake of clarity, understanding cultural studies. So we have come from humanistic to approach to the cultural approach. Okay, and where you have all these schools, formalism or new, essentially Russian formalism, the Czech Prague Circle, and new criticism of US. Then you have psychoanalytical criticism because of Freud and Jung, later Lacan, Marxist criticism, starting with Karl Marx and his very close friend and collaborator Engels, and lot of neo-Marxism and so on. Other subdivisions are also there. Then very important area, structuralism, which actually for a long time gave a hope. Whatever I've been talking about, no, let's say the problem of interpretation, etc. They try to, or they claim that they have solved it, starting with Saussure. So for some time, then semiotics, which is a takeoff of structuralism. Then from there, you have a kind of reader response criticism, which is a fallout of both humanism, both new criticism as well as structuralism. Because new criticism said there's nothing beyond the text, the author is of primary importance, etc. So whatever meaning is contained in the text, but as reader response simply put, they said it is the reader who is important in the interpretation, not the author, not the text. Actually, you have a triumvirate. So in the process of reading, which is actually the way that we deal with a verbal, no, that is graphical text that we are doing, not talking about listening to something. Even that is a text is today actually means anything. Can be a song that you listen to, can be a cartoon, can be no YouTube, no video, can be no a graphic novel, so to speak, can be a proper no something dealing with writing as we are seeing right now. So everything is text. Okay. So reader response criticism tells us that there are three elements. One is the author, of course. Then you have the actual text, and then the reader. So there's a kind of interconnection between these three, and all these actually go into the reading process. Actually, should correspond to, let's say, meaning, very broadly put or loosely put, meaning. But whether that can be arrived at and all another, that is the problem of theory. So reader criticism, then postmodern criticism. Actually, they kind of a takeoff from post-structuralism. Actually, this is a condition, so it's not actually an approach. Technically speaking, postmodern condition we talk about, but still very often it is included. So I have also included it. Postmodern criticism and something called new historicism. People like Stephen Greenblatt, etc. A very important area, post-colonial criticism, thanks to Edward Said especially, and so many others who have come after him, Homi Bhabha, Spivak, and others. For us in India, it's a very important area of, essentially it talks about the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized, let's say British and India, etc., and how it is reflected in literature. So post-colonial criticism. Then post-structuralism, which is a counter to structuralism. Again here, largely Derrida, little later, probably Foucault, Barthes. Barthes started off as structuralist, then he becomes a post-structuralist, he jumps. So again, why? No, obviously he was convinced about structuralism, then he saw the deficiencies of science, so he became a post-structuralist. So we can't prevent anyone from doing that. Then feminist criticism, from where we have, let's say, women's studies to gender studies. Within that, you have something called queer theory or lesbian gay criticism, sometimes it's called. Then a very important area today because of global warming and other things, eco-criticism that we have today. Then something called, because of racial issue in US, critical race. Then very important, like there are some areas like minority studies, ethnic studies, disability studies, kind of the study of marginalized people. Even these have become kind of important approaches to literary thing. Then finally, cultural studies. What is cultural studies? Okay, simply put, literature is not the only representation of culture. Earlier, we used to assume that. So you want to know about culture, I want to know about Victorian era, the culture of Victorian period. Probably I read the no, Victorian poets, Browning, Arnold, and Tennyson. So now they say literature is probably a privileged approach, and maybe sometimes it is a kind of a, even within course a false approach, though they don't use that term. It is no longer the foregrounded approach. So literature is kind of put or pushed into the background in cultural studies. They focus on interdisciplinary studies, at least, even if you have literary work as a kind of a text to study, they will apply, let's say, film or music or some other area of cultural representation and study literature, or else they will go purely into the other forms. And one way to understand this, I think a couple of years back, we had this Bob Dylan getting the Nobel Prize. He's something like a Michael Jackson, no, giving, maybe, even I'm not very familiar with Bob Dylan, but I guess we all know Michael Jackson. Just imagine Michael Jackson getting a Nobel Prize. Or Tamil lyricist from films. getting a Sahitya Academy Award along with Jayakantan and others. No, it's very shocking. No, reason is, how do you say that pop music or pop lyrics are not literature? That's their main argument, and you can find the Nobel Committee in its wisdom granting. So tomorrow, little later, I don't know, a Beyonce or a Shakira, whoever, once they find it meritorious enough within quotes, you may find, along with poets and novelists, these writers also competing, no, from popular media. Maybe someone like J.K. Rowling can end up getting a Nobel Prize or a Booker Prize or whatever. Just giving as an example of popular culture writer or a Chetan Bhagat from India, etc. Now there's some resistance. We don't, but cultural studies says that you cannot make that kind of distinction. I think I'm way out of running out of time. So this is the timeline of this. Most of these are just only indicative. They're not exact, and different people will contest with just for our own understanding. I've put earlier schools, probably almost the first school, by and large, will be new criticism. Some people will start with Russian formalism, from that new criticism, 1930s, then psychoanalytical criticism, Marxism, and reader response 60s. Structuralism actually 20s, but I suppose it's put in this order because the way it started being applied, probably 60s or 50s, late 50s. So they have put it in this. Yeah, even this is not chronological, it's only indicative. Okay, then post-structuralism, 66 reason why they are able, probably from all these theories, this is one term. I think two areas we can more or less kind of. One is Edward Said's Orientalism, which kind of many may agree or most will agree it's started off post-colonialism. Then post-structuralism, Structure, Sign and Free Play, Discourse of Human Sciences by Derrida. Johns Hopkins University presented in that symposium. So that was given in 1966. So quite often these two are dates or texts which are fixed. The new historicism, from which kind of you pick up cultural studies, feminism. Again, 1960s, no. You had Virginia Woolf in 1920s. Earlier, no. Wollstonecraft. At least Woolf we can start, and talk about feminist criticism in 20s. Again, see, these are variations. So gender studies, 70s, probably now eco-criticism, okay? And another way of looking, another author, modernism, formalism, so on. So this is just for academic interest, but you can look at the different. This is a graphical representation, from classical theory, Renaissance theory. Then you have romantic theory, very important in literature, I forgot to mention him. I talked about Arnold and all. But you did have people, including Wordsworth, Coleridge, of course, they all talked about a lot of aspects of literature. So what we say criticism. So from romantic criticism, probably you have formalism, the first school, so to speak. Then you do have something called psychoanalysis and Marxism, but since they are outside literature, kind of, they may be earlier, but they put little outside. Formalism is nothing but Russian formalism, from which the other branch of it is new criticism. Then simultaneously, you need to juxtapose it with structuralism. Branch of structuralism is semiotics. And from here you have as a reaction post-structuralism or deconstruction, part of post-structuralism, and also postmodernism as a condition, all connected with structuralism. And from new criticism, you have archetypal theory, you have new historicism, you have reader response, I mentioned this. Then from there, cultural studies, and some kind of, and today, yes, feminism, post-colonialism, gender studies, everything is assimilated into culture studies. Not only talks about popular culture and all that, interdisciplinary study, but they also started looking at issues such as race, gender, identity, etc. So all these come under that. So today, very broadly speaking, research students sometimes area of specialization they are writing as cultural studies, because everything is encompassed in cultural studies. So in fact, there's one book, Literary into Cultural Studies, where the author shows how literary studies is kind of subsumed by this broader term called culture. So you won't be wrong in even calling your study not literary studies, but cultural studies. Okay, so that is how we are seeing the development of these various schools. Each school, of course, has its own theories and assumptions. So we need to Am I audible? Am I audible? There was some problem with my no earphones.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Ah, fine, great. So fine. So this is how you have the timeline here. So feminism is also there, and literary theory, cultural theory, so many theories. Starting off with liberal humanism, where literature is no universal concept. He talks about some truths or universal truths about humanity. Then from there, uh, okay, he has not given, like I said, different people. You may have Marxism, you have psychoanalytic theory, then cultural materialism, Raymond Williams, postmodernism, feminism, Marxism, and so on. So this is again another way of looking at theory. So I'll run through this because we are running out of time. So these are various different schools. I've tried to put in each of these, even these details are can be contested, but I hope I have the most crucial elements presented here. Definitely, they are very simple, simplistic, basic. So somebody who wants more details obviously has to do more deeper reading. So this is cannot be a process, but I hope at least the major elements have kind of put it down. So I don't even have the time kind of, and some of this will be quite well known to you. Those who have some interest in theory, surely you will find this actually quite well known. And for such participants, I hope I will be able to convince you to continue participating, because towards the end about implications, maybe something worth your time you will be able to have. So hermeneutics, nothing but theory of interpretation. So how do you interpret? This actually started off with interpretation of the Bible. So it is a theological background. So that's why the complication of no theory. No, so hermeneutics, which has actually been responsible for reader response theory, is essentially a theological process of interpretation originally applied in interpreting the Bible. So there were differences of when some of the theologians, they started giving their interpretation of various books of the Bible and various chapters, so to speak. Then they realized no, we should not kind of have a quarrel among ourselves. We need to first frame the proper methods of interpretation, and then it will be obvious. All of us will be probably arriving at the correct way of interpreting. So it relates to a general theory of methods involved in extracting it. The reason I put this before everything else is I think this is very important. A text is there with us, a song is there, maybe even music. Of course, music, supposing we may not have much knowledge of music, it's purely instrumental, so to speak, without words, probably that's another text. Even there, some meaning can be arrived. But all other forms, we need to interpret. It is impossible to deal with nonsense. You try writing a nonsensical, or try talking for a minute, without any sense. It's extremely, almost I'll say it's impossible. Because human mind is tuned to grasping meaning. The first response that we have from any text, including today when we talk about the technique, not the theme. But even now, without some meaning, it's difficult to understand. So the principles involved in extracting meaning, so this is textual interpretation, which actually became a broader philosophical theory. And as a methodology, it talks about the nature of interpretation. What is interpretation? What is its nature? How do we interpret? What are the methods of interpretation, etc., which have far-reaching effects, not only to literary studies, but to religion, anthropology, to humanity itself. In fact, that is my argument towards the end. Theory, as such, or even literary theory, has implications to every human activity. Therefore, to humanity itself. That's my kind of very broad conclusion that I will try to put it across to you. So it is not theory only to literature. Through literature, as a representation of world, as a representation of culture, that is literary work. So therefore, theory also helps me to kind of deal with, or let's say negotiate, so to speak, using a technical. I try not to use many technical words, okay, negotiate the world, so to speak. So hermeneutics ultimately is important for all branches of, probably not so much scientific branches, but all other non-scientific branches, whatever it could be, including probably even psychology. Because let's say dream and dream analysis, again, who gives the authority? So Freud interprets something as one way, somebody challenges that. For example, Jung, the disciple of Freud, no, goes against his teacher and proposes collective unconscious theory. How does he do that? When Freud was sticking with the ego, superego, or conscious, unconscious, dream interpretation, etc. So this is very important. Then among the earliest criticisms, psychoanalytical Marxists, of course, starts off with Marx, who talk about no, the base structure and superstructure. The base structure is something material, economic, etc. That is the foundation of any society. And the takeoff of this base structure is actually art. Putting it another way, art is something inferior or almost a byproduct. Art is not something. In fact, Marx did not spend much time with literature. His focus was more economic theory or ideological theory. He did not focus much. Later writers started looking at literature in a more closer manner. So literature or art is a byproduct. So what is important here is the kind of hegemony or the way in which cultural texts use the ideology of the ruling class to propagate, okay, their base ideas or their major ideas. So in other words, cultural texts are propagandist texts, and Marxist criticism kind of highlights or makes open or makes it clear the underlying ideological basis, which is largely capitalist. So that is how Marxism works. Likewise, Raymond Williams also talked, but instead of the earlier Marxist critics looking at literature per se, Raymond Williams talked about everything or included everything from television programs to opera, music, like I said, everything is worthy, everything is a production, so to speak, everything there is a commercial basis. And I think today, of course, when publishing houses are there for lobbying for a particular text, sometimes it is possible that a particular Booker Prize winner and all, I'm just suggesting, I'm not concluding, it is possible that they are more effective lobbyists therefore a particular text is, because obviously a Booker Prize text is going to sell. So commercial background you cannot remove. So Marxist criticism discusses all this. Psychoanalytical criticism is huge. Freud, then Jung, Lacan, all these. So they also talk about close reading, which you will find in New Criticism, close reading. Then they are trying to look at the unconscious statements or unconscious manifestations, not the very obvious and the manifest discourse elements. So something that is at a unconscious level. Let us say the Oedipal complex, for example. The Freudian critics will be more keen on looking at the Oedipal complex, or the Electra complex that is present in a text. Let's say, you take Oedipus Rex, Sophocles' own story of Oedipus, from which you have the Oedipal complex thing. So a Freudian critic obviously will look at the attraction of the son for the mother, whereas as a classicist we will look at the, let's say, the intensity of the tragedy of the story of the myth. We look at something totally different. We look at what is called as affect theory, the way it affects me. Let's say the catharsis that Aristotle talks of, how it purges pent-up emotions in me. But the psychological or the psychoanalytical approach will be something very different. So again, this is applicable to all, not just psychoanalytical. There is no single, within this so-called school of theory, there are several sub-branches. So that's why it's a very exhaustive, sometimes challenging, sometimes impossible task also. So we need to just understand principally that we look at the psychic structures, not that is overtly expressed, but that is implicit, or sometimes it is something that is passed over in silence. Nothing is mentioned. So this actually is what deconstruction is also, strangely, they also look at this. Passing over in silence, the silences, the gaps in the text. What do they say? How do the gaps in the text challenge the interpretation of that which is evident in the text. So that is essentially the subversion of reading that is taking place in deconstruction. So analysis of the textual subject, what operates beneath, so than what it seems to say. So that is what they are interested in. So structuralism again starts off with Saussure. In fact, he uses the term system. So we don't have the term. If you look, we substitute the term structuralism with the term system, it becomes very, so linguistic system, literary system, sociological system, etc. So all these branches of structuralism, anthropology, everything that has come, they are studying certain systems. Even something like grammar, for example, we have a grammatical system. Let's say you divide it into parts of speech, and each part of speech you are trying to analyze, and therefore by looking at the various parts of speech and the interrelation between these, therefore you are able to arrive at, let's say, English grammar. No, what are you doing? A systematic categorization of the different elements. Therefore, by look at all these elements or putting them together and comparing and contrasting them, you arrive at the body of knowledge, body of the system. For example, grammar. Essentially, structuralism. Again, I'm very well aware that what I'm saying is quite, in a sense, it's even crude, but I think we can go on from this. So once we have the basics, very clear in our mind, depending on your orientation or your kind of preferences, you can pick up one school. I would strongly recommend, even if you're in PG, I would strongly recommend that you try to access, because one, today research is mandatory, so I'm sure all of you should do some, whether you go to collegiate service or you come to schools, it's essential that some form of research you are involved in. And when you're doing research in literary studies, they will ask you what is the method, and it is advisable or recommended that you have a method of interpreting the text. So of course you can do it in ELT and all that, but if you're doing it in literary studies, so therefore this theory, it's a good start to have it, like Madras University and all colleges, autonomous, everybody has at least one paper on theory, so sometimes two papers. So maybe they'll start off with classical criticism and all. I've not done that. I've only looked at what you say, contemporary criticism. Okay, so starts off with Saussure, who it's actually a science of science, SCIENC, science of science. That is structuralism of semiotics. So he talked about signified. I think linguistics, Perot, Lang, signified, synchronic, diachronic, syntagmatic, paradigmatic, so etc. That largely sign is very important. A sign is made up of signifier and the signified. So commonly TREE, that sound, let's say tree, signifies an object. So sign is, and what he did, what you call the genius of Saussure is the correlation or the equivalence. So signifier is equal to signified. That's what we used to assume. A tree, the object tree is actually nothing but the tree. TREE or T plus R plus E plus E is equal to the object. That's what we were assuming actually. But his genius was that he said the signifiers are arbitrary, at random, in a sense a social kind of a acceptance or social kind of code. So you can also call, let's say, instead of tree referring to the object tree, a plant, you can even say wood as referring to tree. All of us think of, let's say, Chennai and Madras. So we started calling this Chennai. Has it changed the signified the city? No. Why? There is nothing sanctimonious about the signifiers. But earlier linguists and language people, literary people or philosophers used to pay so much attention because they thought that the signifier is equal to signified, is equal to reality and everything else. Actually speaking, theory has a lot of what you call base in philosophy. It all comes from trying to understand reality or metaphysics, simply put. It all comes from that. We try to, trying to kind of grasp reality. We try to, arrive at the meaning of the reality around us, the reality of the world, etc. Literature is an expression of this reality. Mimetic theory we talked about, isn't it? So, how do we access this reality? Essentially, it's a philosophical, the foundation of theory, my argument is it's philosophical. Maybe that is why it's difficult. we do not understand, no, whether it's postmodernism, all this has a philosophical basis. And when you understand that, of course, the other socio-political offshoots like even eco-criticism, feminism, etc., probably are not so flow. But these structuralism, these are actually very, even humanism. We're all trying to arrive at a meaning of the reality or of the world outside us, of which literature is an expression. That's all. A literary text is an expression of this reality. Okay. So this is how literary the linguistic sign is used to study cultural phenomena. Also, they also talk about binary opposition. So, like I said, Lang, Perrault, syntagmatic, paradigm, synchronous. So they are very fond of binary opposition, which is what is challenged by post-structuralists, who say that it is not possible to have something, let's say, such a distinction, white versus black, or male versus female, good versus evil, where you give more value to one, the left side one, let's say male versus female, more value is given to the male. So everybody starts questioning that assumption. Okay, so this is what. So in study of literary work, structuralism is distinguished by rejection of traditional notions where literature expresses an author's meaning or reflects reality. They don't accept that. Okay, so we don't have time, so I'm going to run through. Semiotics is a takeoff from structuralism, which talks about sign precisely. A sign can be anything, can even be a traffic sign. For example, Roland Barthes has written a book called Mythologies, where he adopts the structuralist method to give us what is called as a signification, the meaning of very many activities, including detergent, soap, and wrestling. Can you imagine? He has written an essay on detergent soap, and he's giving a signification. For him, that is a sign, a cultural sign. Wrestling is a cultural sign. Very interesting text. At that time, he was a structuralist, Roland Barthes. Later on, of course, we know him. Death of the Author, so famous. Just a couple of pages it is. Kind of transformed the entire way in which we looked at literature, and reader suddenly became very important. So sign is everything. Okay, semiotics. Then new criticism. They did not bother about the historical background, biographical background. For them, text is everything. Text is self-contained. Text has a meaning, and the text follows certain conventions and norms. So people use, like Emerson will use paradox, Clement Brooks will use irony. Many writers have used different terms to look at how a writer conveys a self-contained and complete meaning within the text. That is what is done by new critics. So the focus on text is everything. Again, you will find this reflected in Derrida, who said there is nothing outside the text. So Derrida talks about when he's discussing deconstruction, of course in French, which is translated as nothing beyond the text, nothing outside the text. Text is everything. So they are focused. So by the process of looking at the text, even though they do not talk about authorial intention, that is intentional fallacy, it is called, mistake of trying to find, but the text is, the author is the source of the text. So even if you do not look at the intention and look at the product of the author, it is very true that the reader is not important. So the three triumvirate of author, text, and reader, they do not focus on the reader at all. Reader response theory as a takeoff from post-structuralism, they do not bother about author at all. So there are two extreme positions. In new criticism, reader is dead. In reader response theory, author is dead. The text is there, meaning is there, world is there. But how do we interpret that? That is where all our complication comes. So text is autonomous, it is closed, meaning that everything that you need to know is in the text. If you do a proper reading, close reading, you can engage with the text. So essential basis or framework of new criticism is the liberal humanism. They want to show the organic unity of a text, complete, self-contained, no gaps, so to speak. There's a term that is used in post-structuralism, no gaps in the text. Everything is filled, no gaps, no fill in the blanks, everything is done. So if you carefully study the text through a close reading, in fact, again, like I said, deconstruction also do a close reading only. So sometimes there are a lot of overlap. So you will find the main theme and textual elements. Okay, that is new criticism. which itself is a takeoff from formalism. Actually, the word formalism actually means they were the first to ask that question: what makes a text actually literary? It goes with the term form, the form, the way something appears. What is the form of a text? Let's say Robert Browning, we say dramatic monologue. So they look at the form. The formalists will try to emphasize on the technique, the literary devices, the images, the symbols, etc., that is used in a text. And their argument, till that time, it was good, actually speaking, in a sense. If a text, I said whether it's literary or non-literary, one easy way when you apply formalism is, if it has some of these devices or strategies that are used, technical strategies, then it becomes literary. They are not worried, actually speaking, about the meaning. The formalists were not worried about the meaning, but they are important primarily for one reason, because properly speaking, as a school of thought, they were the first to ask this question: what makes a text literary? Not because it's prescribed in the syllabus or some anthology has it, etc. Not because there are no answers. I'm just posing the question, which is posed by so many giants in our field. I'm only voicing their thought. But these are, it may be very uncomfortable, but these are the reason why it is voiced is not for us to say that literature is purely subjective, nothing called, that is not the intention, but to elevate this study into a higher, almost, let us say, scientific, giving it a scientific validity. We're trying to give a scientific validity, scientific in the sense of something that can be tested and valued. So far, it is very subjective, personal, including all these schools. But hopefully, by an application of some or a combination of these theories, we can arrive at a way of interpreting, and maybe in our own way. Science theory gives us some understanding of reality. Likewise, literature may be the medium, maybe the form, maybe the appearance is different. Maybe it's in the form of a story, for example, not a theory, mathematical theory, or some kind of physical or theory of physics, for example. No, but that I think no one will dispute. As long as you can try to say that by application of some principles, you will arrive at this judgment. So that is what we are trying to do. So new critics do this. Then post-structuralism is a reaction against it. What happened actually at the time of structuralism? There was mass celebration, because people said, oh, finally we have a way, we have a scientific method of studying a structure or system. I want to study literature. For example, programs in BA literature, English literature, MA English in India, in Tamil Nadu, in Madras University, etc. How do we go about? One very common method, though today slightly it is different, is this dividing the entire program into poetry, drama, prose, fiction, etc. So British drama, British poetry, British fiction, British prose, and then maybe a bit of Indian writing. Then what are we doing here? We are trying to just look at the system. We are looking at the system. So when I study literature, when I study when I want to access literature, what happens is I am trying to just look at the way it can be categorized or classified. And when I study British poetry, British drama, what is the meaning, implication? I know English literature. So that actually what we are doing in our UG programs and so on and so forth is actually we are following the structuralist method. So they said that no, there is something inherent, rupture as Derrida calls it. There is a break, a rupture, something like a puncture in a tire, so to speak. So the air leaks out. No, a rupture in this so-called solidity of structuralism. So because you need a reference point, that's what Derrida says, or a center, based on which you have to study everything. And that center is not the center, it is decentered. Or center is not the center. Even the term decentered is kind of not exact. Center is not the center. So that Derrida, the referential point. For example, I'll give you a simple, which he himself has given. What do you mean by center not being the center? Take culture in a very broad sense. So the European culture was considered as, let's say, in a colonial era, or when they were colonizers especially, that was considered as a very That was a standard, so to speak. No, that was a reference. So just think of a dress. So, for example, no, the male attire of a shirt and no pair of trousers, for example. See, this is not, let's say, an Indian dress. So, no, we very often probably people were not wearing anything, on the upper body. They would just have a, some kind of a towel or whatever, and they would wear a dhoti, etc. No, that's how people are. So you will find some elderly people even today, they don't wear no pants or whatever they are wearing. But then why has this come? Because unconsciously, just a very simple example is actually true. The kind of the three-piece suit, for business people, especially businessmen, including in Japan, you will find that the business people CEOs, a Sony TV CEO will come in a three-piece suit, but it's essentially European. So we have given more prominence to that way of dressing. Reason is they have colonized us. We are not able to exhibit our own mode of dressing. What Derrida is saying, there is no centrality to, let's say a shirt being the norm of decent dressing or formal dressing, wearing a tie, wearing shoes. No, where is it said? They have made that as a reference point, and that post-structuralist. Therefore, what happens? Let's say Shakespeare is the reference point for all drama. Now, deconstruction will challenge that. Reason is, what is propagated, let us say, by Shakespeare, let's say use of language, is not the way that we need to definitely decide what is literature. You follow? If you say that beauty of language is what is literary, Derrida will ask, how do you know that? Who has told you this? What is the basis of your assumption? And so the entire structure falls through. Then you will say, then you can't have precisely plurality, relativism. All these are offshoots of post-structuralism. So therefore, what happens in post-structuralist thought? Instability of meaning. There is no one meaning, no universal meaning, no single meaning, no unity, nothing. Everything is broken down. Then how do you go about in that kind of, again, that you will have to do a proper study. So this fixed binary oppositions, they said, no. Then indeterminacy, that is, texts are not determinate. The meaning of text is not fixed, determined. Indeterminacy. Then the subjective reading. You can't practice this in your exam, of course, but essentially, whatever you write, actually we have to give marks if you properly apply post-structuralist thought or reader response. Okay, so this is very, again, I think probably very ambitious program, what I wanted to do. So I'm running through, I'm sorry. So deconstruction offshoot. So text is essentially the explicit meaning, something from the implicit meaning. That is what he's trying to say. Okay. Then plurality of significance. Okay. There is no one meaning. There is plurality of meaning. So this is what happens. Different meanings, not single meaning. Then there's a deferral of meaning. Deference is a very famous term by Derrida, which is both differ and defer, both different from and which is postpone. These two terms are combined in deferment. Postmodern condition, modern condition, that's essentially human condition, where there is again there is multiplicity of representations, multiplicity of identities, multiplicity of truths. So postmodernist text will not give us single truth, universal truth. It will give us many truths. Then very, very, very famous statement by Lyotard, incredulity towards grand narratives or meta narratives. We are suspicious. Of course, he was talking about narratives like Marxism and all, but later on it was included even religion. So religion claiming that it answers everything, every human question of all human people all over the world. Let's say one branch of religion or one way of faith. They say no, that is not true. So you don't have grand or meta narratives. You have local narratives. That is the emphasis of postmodernism. So they also started questioning this high and low culture, which modernism was very much stressing. Then other dimensions are also there. Reader response, they also told the way in which reader becomes important, not the author. Author is dead, birth of the reader. So the reader decides the meaning. In putting it in other words, the meaning is created, or the meaning is born out of the labor, literally using the term in terms of physical delivery, labor of the reader. So the reader delivers the child, which is the meaning, and each one does it in his or her own way. So literary work is not autonomous, self-contained, but their reality is established by reader. Okay. So again, the notion of single, definitive, determined meaning is challenged, and two very important components of reader response. One, role of reader cannot be ignored. So far, new criticism, they have totally ignored the reader. Here, the text comes to life, simply put, only when there is a reader. You can have the greatest text. You can have Shakespeare and all the plays of Shakespeare. Let's say nobody reads it. Shakespeare is practically dead. The only way Shakespearean text or Shakespeare himself literally comes to life is when there are readers who read and give meaning to that text. Otherwise, on own, all the 36 or 38 plays of Shakespeare, some say 39, whatever, they, they are they are just pieces of paper and some markings on pieces of paper. They have no meaning at all. Okay, so role of reader is of primary importance. Actually, understand literature. Then readers are not passive consumers. We are active consumers. So they actively make meaning. So they are the creators of meaning. Then feminism, of course, talks about gender oppression, gender equity, gender inequality, the way patriarchal system works. All these are matters that come. And feminism in literature also talks about how male authors and canon fixation privileges or makes the patriarchal kind of text or the text by male writers more better or superior, etc. So gynocriticism, for example, talks about inclusion of female authors, not only male authors. Okay, so this is about feminism, again running through offshoot of that gender. So because feminism actually assumes there are only two genders, binary, male and female. Of course, today we know LGBTQI plus they are saying, so some more which maybe they can be added. So you have gay, lesbian, all that. So gender, it is biologically it is accepted today that gender is not binary, it is plural. And of course, in feminism, you have that famous statement: one is not born a woman, one is made a woman. Simone de Beauvoir, second sex, meaning that the terms masculine, feminine are social constructs, cultural constructs. They are not biological. Biological sex is different from masculinity and femininity, which are cultural constructs. Meaning, let's say a man should be very chivalrous, very brave, heroic, should be able to fight 100 people like a cinema hero, etc. Woman should be subservient, like feminine quality, like a flower or a kind of a small. So all those are social constructs. They are not biological. So feminism talks about that, and gender studies goes a step forward and includes all the other genders, intersex, then gay orientation, homosexual, etc. So it is, a person like Judith Butler, gender studies, very famous, critic, practitioners. So they talk and they say that all the categories are products of culture, and they don't reflect culture. And this is how gender studies or queer studies is incorporated. New historicism, simply put, is also a historical method, but what they tried to do is they did not take only literature as the basis of a historical kind of interpretation. Anything, including a diary or whatever, any personal document, a journal writing, whatever, everything becomes part of the way in which you understand a particular historical movement. That is, I think, a very important aspect of new historicism. Post-colonialism, how the relationship between colonizer and colonized, etc. Edward Said's Orientalism, very important. Again, here where the historical center, the marginalized, subaltern, and the mainstream, so to speak, the center and margin, European center and all other cultures, it has been dethroned and subverted. Okay, so this is very important regarding post-colonialism. Then eco-criticism, simply put, relationship between culture and society, or literature and society, and the world around us, ecology around us. So the interrelationship between cultural products, cultural artifacts, including literature, and the world around us. So this is how we look, and there has been a kind of a rereading of romantic poets in here also. Agampuram in Tamil, we have an interest in the earlier periods, classical Tamil, where so much of emphasis is on nature the correlation or the balance between humans and nature, which was present in earlier writings, in English literature is reflected in romantic poetry, a little bit in transcendental writings of American Walden, for example. It is there in Walden also. So all that they study. Okay. Then this last phase, very important, cultural studies. From liberal humanism, we have been seeing, largely speaking, structuralist, post-structuralist, some offshoots like post-colonial feminism, etc. But I would probably rate no, structuralism and post-structuralist thought as very crucial aspects in the different schools. Finally, cultural studies, from starting from Richard Hogarth, Raymond Williams, then Stuart Hall, this very famous CCCS, Birmingham University Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. 1960s it was started, and what they did was they looked at aspects of mass culture. So mass culture or popular culture, not let's say minority culture like, such as literature. Literature is kind of a minority culture. It is not the only reflection of culture, and you find that even this distinction, of course, this was done even by postmodernism as a condition. High culture, low culture, high art, low art. They kind of broke down that. Then definitely cultural studies they did it, and they also have everything from deconstruction to gender studies. Everything is included. That's why I said today, very simply put, literary studies is equal to cultural studies. Any approach that you of these schools that we are talking, if you apply it to a study of literature, it becomes actually almost everything, feminism, everything becomes part of cultural studies. So what is important about it is it's kind of interdisciplinary. So you have media studies, you have anthropology, along with literary criticism. You also look at other manifestations such as you know, elements of entertainment, films, for example, music, advertising. You can take advertising and treat it as a discourse and apply the methodology of cultural studies to interpret advertising. In a sense, done by actually Roland Barthes himself, using the structuralist method. Publishing, television, everything, and also computers. And so we today have something called post-humanism, so where all these technological elements are also brought into, including eco consciousness, everything put together. This is the human condition, they're saying, post-humanism. Okay, so in cultural studies, the emphasis on pop music, music videos, instead of canonical, they underplayed the value given to proper literature, and they started focusing on music videos and all that. So some of the practitioners, Simon during Australian Stuart Hall, all these are advocates. So literary studies, it is being subverted. The position of literary studies is subverted. So what we have been seeing, I'll complete this and look at the implication. So broadly speaking, from theory which is outside literature per se, we have taken from different schools of thought like psychoanalysis, Marxism, etc. We have framed our own kind of literary theory, and today that literary theory is kind of by and large settled down in culture. Again, I have to tell you that in the United States, there's a big kind of movement towards applying these theories initially, 60s, 70s, 80s. But there was one person called Baudelaire who, he's a postmodernist. He questioned actually whether really Gulf War took place, because he said that there's no television war. CNN started beaming these images of the war, especially nighttime war, into it's like looking at a video game. So applying postmodern theory to its real logical conclusion, because he talked about simulacra and simulation and all that, he said it is actually a kind of virtual war and did not take place at all. That, of course, really offended the general public of United States, because so many American soldiers were dying, and nothing upsets Americans as much as the death of American soldiers. They probably think them as superhumans or something. And from then on, they started looking closer. Till that point of time, it's kind of within universities and all. People started looking. I'll show you a Calvin Hobbes cartoon actually a little later. You'll see that. So they started, kind of challenging this entire. They said it's all abstract, arcane, pedantic. It has no relevance to. And today it's a kind of, in United States, theory is no longer fashionable. At least I can say that, if not unpopular. So that we have to keep that in mind. So today, literary theory has become interdisciplinary body of cultural theory. So you do inquire the human, but it is interdisciplinary body. And some of the schools, the practitioners, I mentioned some of these people, IRHs, all that. So you have a, because you should know all this. So every one of these theories, for example, post-colonial, look at Fanon. I told, of course, Syed, Fanon's theory, is quite different from Edward Said's emphasis, is different from Baba. So that's why I said it's not homogeneous. Even within one branch of theory, it is not homogeneous. Different writers have different perspectives. So nature and practice of theory, we've been looking at this, all these things. Largely speaking, only two, this point we can look at. Text-based theories such as new criticism, radar response and all that, and historical theories. So historical bases like feminism, these are two very broad. Again, you can contest this. No, you can't just label under these. This is also a binary division and you can challenge it. So a capacity to generalize about phenomena, that is theory. Okay, and it helps us to understand the context and the ideology. Both are important. The context of the text being written and the ideology. So this is the reason or the need for the practice of literary theory. But there will be several divergent points of view. And all this we have seen obscure. I think every one of us know this, how extremely difficult or impossible theory is. That's why many of us don't go into it also. So this is the problem of style, the problem of style in theory. Very nicely phrased actually. Then it is the history. The history of theory is nothing but the history of changing notions of theory, different perspectives of what is reading, what is interpretation, what is literature. So this is what essentially history of literary theory is. You, depending on which part of or which school you're following, you will get one perspective about reading, one perspective about meaning, one perspective of actually what is literature. So this is the one that I have. So what he's saying, so actually quite a humorous, and it's come in mainstream. Calvin Hobbes, I think, very popular cartoon strips. So mainstream it has come. Somehow, fortunately, I could get this, where he's talking about writing as inflating weak ideas, obscuring poor reasoning, and inhibiting clarity. I think very nicely put. Those anti-theorists will exactly agree with this. Weaker ideas are inflated, made to become very big ideas, and which actually hides poor reasoning, and there's no clarity. Actually, very strange, because theory obscures or obfuscates, doesn't clarify. It's supposed to clarify, but it hides. So it's a kind of a paradox. And there's an example given here, dynamics of interbeing and monological imperatives in Dick and Jane, a study in psychic translation gender modes. I think many of the current research articles and projects sound quite similar to this. What it means actually is the intention. So this is what we have been seeing all through. Text can mean anything, all that we have seen, and now it is cultural studies. So the world, the meaning. So the text as a way of interpreting the world, reality, meaning, and the writer and the reader. Okay. Then the implications. So whether it makes assessment objective, I said scientific and all that. These are questions. I should put a question mark for everything. Just rhetorical questions. Whether evaluation is today objective because of theory, whether assessment is objective, or are we still trying to arrive? Then transcendental significance, ultimate meaning. Let's say truth with a capital T. In earlier parlors, God, so to speak. Higher truth, spiritual truths. They said no, it's not possible, because the nature of sign is such that the signifier is arbitrary. Therefore, no one-to-one corresponding signifier, and therefore no transcendental signifiers. Derrida says that. So you have only free play. You don't have fixed meaning. You have a free association of meanings and signification. Therefore, again, Derrida says the being is not present, which is what philosophy was trying to do, trying to actually prove the presence of being. Again, God. But what he says is the nature of language, at least, makes it such that you can never access being. So you can only have a trace. It's like an airplane that is going, you look up the sky, you don't see the plane there. Maybe a jet fighter plane which is traveling at a very high altitude. You don't see the plane, you can probably hear it, but you see a trace. So you can't fix the meaning, but you can see the trace of the meaning. That is essentially what Derrida says. Otherwise, argument, is it pure subjectivity? Again, we go back, personal interpretation, personal thing. whether reader response method leads us to that. The deconstructions of metaphysics of being, whether it is not counted, which means that's why I said religion, philosophy, everything, including our faith, no, it's questioned. Properly speaking, there is no proper answer, let's say, given to post-structuralist thought, as far as my knowledge goes. We have just kind of pushed it aside. So the questions that are, for example, absence of being, metaphysics of being, that Derrida talks in structure science, probably have not been counted. Okay, then I talked about Baudelaire. So theory which accesses reality. What reality? Relative reality, plurality of reality. What we say even in science today, they're talking about multiverse, not universe. They are saying that actually there are simultaneously, along with our Milky Way galaxy and this cosmology that we have knowledge of, simultaneously today scientists are proposing there are multiverses. If this is a scientific reality, definitely possible in literature. So no transcendental signifies, it's a very actually disturbing for me personally. No access to reality. Again, these are very what you call totally extreme statements, but I hope you can understand the spirit behind it. It doesn't mean actually impossible, not like that, but no final access to what is reality, capital R, let us say, through phenomenology. This is through post-structuralism. Then in literature, no absolute meaning through reader response. So these are some of the implications. Sorry, I really ran out of time. If a couple of questions I can answer, still you have the energy left after this, I'll be happy. So some general introduction, some of them are good actually. Anthologies which we read, especially Norton anthology of theory criticism, very important. And then some, of course, I didn't include M.H. Abrams and all, starting point. This what we call Peter Barry is very popular. M.H. Abrams, a glossary of literary terms. Oxford, dictionary of literary terms. There are very good introductions to start off. Supposing you want post-structuralism, go to the Oxford or M.H. Abrams. From there you can take off. No, so this is some bibliography. So thank you very much, and some questions are there. I'll be glad to take.
Sir, that was a wonderful session. We have now come to the question and answer session. Participants, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat box.
I could not access this chat box because there is some complication. So I'm sorry if I missed out. Yeah, so.
We have a question by Dr. P.A.
Yes, sir.
Let me read it out. Don't you think there is too much theorization of the text without true analysis of a text?
It's a very essential question. I thank the person, Dr. P.A. for this. Essentially, that is, so today there seems to be a position, probably unlike if you are in the United States, I'm not sure actually what they're using. But by and large, they are telling us that you cannot analyze a text or interpret a text without some kind of theory. Yes, I agree 100%. For example, if you give me a choice, I would go back to the humanistic approach to literature. A universal component, single meaning, single theme. That's a personal thing. So certainly, yes. And in research, very often, if you are looking at, for example, no, there are still some humanistic concepts that are let's say, self or even identity, or even, let's say, some concepts like evil. And people ask, what is the methodology? So it's identity. What is the framework of identity? The term subject, which is what is preferred today. So I am not sure. I think theory, no, almost it is like a necessary evil. One. Second, there are a lot of elements that theory addresses. For example, the issue of, let's say, reality. What is reality? Which I think was assumed in earlier humanistic tradition. Today, we don't take for granted. Assumption, of course, is taking something for granted. We question everything. So, no, drama. What is drama? Literature. What is literature? So, let us go back to even great theorists like Terry Eagleton. They admit that we don't have a definition of literature. So, if you do not have a method of even giving the basic principles, then how can you have, let's say, literary studies? a kind of Tonil Ragasyam. If you want to ask me, I don't want to spoil the youngsters by telling, but anyway, sometimes they have to confront this. What is literature? How do you differentiate a text? Theory comes in as a method to at least help us distinguish. Maybe it will tell you can't separate literary from not literary. Nobel Prize for Literature is awarded to Bob Dylan. What else you want? I think followed by Alice Munro and others. So this is the problem, but that is a subjective. But I would put it like this: as many critics have pointed it out, there's a kind of a prestige. I will use the term snob value. So if you're using, let's say you're writing a paper, you want to publish it. You want to get it published in a very good journal. I'm quite certain that they would not accept it, or you would find it extremely difficult. Instead of what you call using a theoretical base. So, and apart from that, merely being a pedantic academic exercise, it doesn't stop with that. Let me say that certain philosophical realities it focuses on. I think it is worth our while to supplement study of literature with. But as many have obviously pointed out, you cannot do an analysis of a text without some assumption, which we call it theory. What is assumption that you will make to, let's say you look at an image, you look at meaning. So whatever it may be, ultimately there will be. Otherwise, it will be a very personal reaction. And then you cannot have any validity to a literary studies as a branch of knowledge. It will be a personal reaction. So when, for example, there's something called film studies. If you want to look at in that sense, films as within quotes inferior to great thinkers and writers and intellectuals that we have in literature, when you have a branch of study called film studies, why not? So I hope to some extent I have answered, but there is but you need to realize, even if it doesn't come under a structured school of theory, we must have a basis for analysis, and it may probably come under one of these, because by and large everything is covered, I suppose, under this branch. So you do it as a very separate kind of a study by using theory very openly and evidently. Even if you do not do it, it is not possible to interpret literature, one. Second, to ask questions whether it's literary or not, and finally to judge whether it is, what standard is it. Supposing I write a play, would you equate that to that of Mahesh Dattani or Mahashweta Devi or whoever? I think the answer should be no. Is it not? Unless probably I'm the next one to array. So normally no. How can we? No, I have to distinguish what has happened in literature. Wordsworth's poetry. Maybe I'm also interested in nature and I write poetry. There must be a way to separate. That hopefully theory comes in. Okay. Thank you for that. Actually, very, very, very crucial question. Any others that you have?
Thank you, sir. That was a detailed answer. Do we have any other questions?
Some other, I think. Can we make our presentation discussion? Yes, I think to some extent I have done it, but it's more time consuming. You look for something ready-made, like put that Calvin Hobbes. It's not readily available, and you need to make use of software, more tedious. So it's easier to put it in a PowerPoint, and so definitely I would subscribe to this. You can also have some audio visual, maybe some clipping from a YouTube video, maybe a professor, maybe Stephen Greenblatt talking about Shakespeare, which is available in YouTube. Put that when you're talking about new historicism, it would make it really, this is a wonderful thing. If you focus on one school, probably it would have been more. So since kind of asked to give an overview, so I had to talk in a very general sense about different schools, then what are the problems or / challenges, and then what actually it is. So I was tied up for time for preparing this. But this is a good method actually, especially for younger students or scholars. you incorporate some images or video and audio, it would be much more interesting. This older method of lecture based, nobody, even though you may have a screen to share and all that, still it's quite tedious. But there is a limitation. Very complex ideas cannot be, probably. You can maybe at best make some bullet forms, not. So there is some thing. Okay, fine. Any. So either the session was totally illuminating or it was totally beyond beyond understanding or comprehension. Fine. Okay. So I think we can call it. I don't want to rest some question. If it is there, fine. But I
No,
think
it
we
was
can.
wonderful, sir. We
Okay.
don't have any more questions, and we
Fine.
are also running out of time. So
Surely, surely.
let's move forward. I
Yeah.
now invite Dr. Nagaradhika to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon. As Ms. Priyanka just mentioned, I'm Dr. Nagaradhika and I'm faculty at the Department of MA English, Dwaraka's Goverdhan Vaishnav College. I hope you all enjoyed the talk today. It is a pleasure to propose the vote of thanks today on behalf of the Department of MA English, especially so for a person of Dr. Naresh's caliber. Dr. Naresh has always been a support for our department in his characteristic, unassuming manner. It is a mark of his scholarship that he has taken the vast and challenging field of literary theory. It is a mark of his scholarship that he has taken the vast and challenging field of literary theory and unraveled the multiple philosophical tangles to help us develop an understanding and, dare I say, an affinity to the subject. Starting at the very practical and helpful working definitions of literary theory and literary criticism, to succinct explanations of the most popular literary theories, ranging from neo-Aristotelian criticism to the more contemporary and extremely relevant eco-criticism. Thank you for your talk. It has helped us to see ourselves and hopefully literature in fresh new ways, to rephrase the quote at the beginning of your talk today. And finally, thank you very much for the very clever and relevant cartoon from Calvin and Hobbes. Nothing like Calvin's ideas to enlighten any discussion. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
We would like to thank our discerning audience, whose response has been a motivation to us to organize more such talks. They have played their role of an engaged and cooperative gathering, keeping us motivated through the program. We would like to thank the Secretary of the College, Shri Ashok Kumar Mundraji, and our Principal Captain, Dr. Santosh Babu, who have supported us through our endeavor. They say you don't thank your own, but I would not have performed my duty if I did not mention the following people. Our webinar cannot be conducted without the cooperation of all the members of a department. It is here I would like to put on record our gratitude for the dedication of our colleagues, Ms. Priyanka and Ms. Lakshmi, who worked tirelessly under the able tutelage of our head, Dr. Murli Ganam. And finally, as we end most of our webinars, our gratitude is due to our students, a wonderful group of human beings who keep us driven to deliver our best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.